Welcome to Candid Conversation Zoomed In and Comments video channel. My name is Cliff. And these days credibility is such an important thing with everybody out there doing all kinds of things. We want to have that kind of credibility that says, hey, I am the person you want to talk to. Well, somebody is here with me today that can help us navigate that particular world. He's a credibility expert. His name is Mitchell Levy, and Mitchell has worked with Fortune 500 companies. He's been around the world, and uh, he's on podcasts all over the place. So he's really a great expert to have. And Mitchell, thank you very much for taking the time to join us to talk about this really fascinating topic of credibility.
Cliff, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to have a candid conversation.
I love that. That's so cool. So can you, in a nutshell, tell me what the importance of credibility is? How really important in your mindset when you're talking with people is credibility?
I'm going to say something interesting. And what I'll say for both credibility, and I'm going to also throw in the word clarity. For both credibility and clarity, it is absolutely a need. But for many cases, it's not necessarily a want. And so what's important about being credible? Um, First, let me give you a definition. So based on I interviewed 500 thought leaders on credibility between 2019 and 2020. And I'm going to extend the definition that's in the dictionary. So what I want to say is credibility is the quality in which you're trusted, known, and liked. And so the question, how important is credibility? In a time in which we have so many things bombarding us, the desire as someone who's a buyer to buy something, we give the seller 5 seconds. Do we trust this person? Once we get over the 5 seconds, then we're trying to figure out, okay, as I get to know who this company is or who this person is, as I get to know them better, do I still like them? And we buy based on our trusting, knowing, and liking. And so if you don't have credibility and you're missing one of those three elements, there's a good chance you're not going to do as well.
Okay. So trusting, liking, and what was the third one?
Knowing.
Knowing.
And
So those
and
are
Cliff, what I mean on this one, by the way, the expression we know, the one that's in the commonplace is know, like, trust. But that expression came before the internet. That expression is about, hey, well, advertise in the yellow pages so I get to know this person. Maybe I'll like them and maybe I'll trust them. We need to flip the order because if I go to any AI or Google or do any search on any topic, I have opportunities around the world. I
Mhm.
give each opportunity 3 to 5 seconds on trust, and that comes first.
So do I trust it? And I think the other thing too is verification, right? Trust but verify. Is that also part of the credibility cycle as well?
Well, the question on so um, anytime we introduce a new word, thank you for verification, there are so many different concepts of verification. So if you pay X, $8 a month, you get verified. Is that really verification? And that's a good question. So the word that I'd like to use instead of verification is discernment. If somebody says something, what are you going to do to make sure that what they're saying is really true? Now, if it's regarding a service they have, how you can determine if it's true is you start looking at their social proof. You start looking at video testimonials, start looking at endorsements. If we're looking at LinkedIn, I'm looking at the bottom of the LinkedIn profile, which actually does have endorsements, does have recommendations. If you use a different social media platform, what are you doing to discern that what you're hearing is actually the truth?
Ah, and that's where the clarity comes in because you talk about this as well, and that's an important part of this. Without clarity, there's all these things are not in focus, and I think that's what clarification is. Is that a good way to look at clarity?
So I won't say no to that statement because that is true. And then I want to do the and. Okay.
Sure.
So when I did the interviews, I came up with a very specific form of clarity, and that was I interviewed 500 thought leaders. And so my goal was, can these thought leaders articulate who they are? In essence, their vibrational energy, who they are by who they serve, and the pain point or pleasure point of the people they're serving. Can they do that in less than 10 words? And Cliff, 98% of people don't have clarity. And so when you run across somebody who is really clear, they have a very focused audience and they have a very specific way of servicing that audience, and you then get verification through social proof that they've actually done that over and over again, your comfort level is goes through the roof. But what most people do is they've been taught to do the opposite of clarity. They've been taught when they give their 30-second elevator pitch. By the way, I'm going to recommend that everyone throw out the 30-second elevator pitch. They've been taught when they give their 30-second elevator pitch that they make the audience of who they serve as wide as possible. Well, the wider you make it, the less people you attract. The bigger, if you look at a fish net, the bigger the spaces are between the net, and the more fish are going to swim right through. So the more narrow, you've heard the expression, it's a silly one, the witches are in niches, but there's something about that. The more focused you could be, it does so many things for you. It creates a compass. It allows you to say, hey, this is a client that makes sense. This is a client that doesn't make sense. And saying no to people who come in the door is going to save you a lot of time, effort, heartache in many cases, right? So it's a compass. But what it also does, if you've done a good job with the clarity of who you serve and how you serve them, if you've done a really good job, you've turned that clarity statement. Um, I call it a CPOP. I'll put that there. I'll come back to it if you want. I call it a CPOP. If you take your CPOP and you then start sharing it everywhere, it becomes a magnet where people get attracted to you because if you say something in less than 10 words, it is much more memorable than if it takes you, 50 or 100 or 20 minutes. Cliff, you ever ask somebody, what do you do? And, 10 minutes later, they're still telling you.
Oh, I've been there, yes. And it's like the other thing too is when they use the $50 words to explain who they are, that drives me insane. It's like, simple, please. Like I was explaining the word retard to somebody. Like people use that word
Mm,
so wrong. They say, well, that's retarded, meaning that's stupid. Well, no, retard comes from the French. It means retard, means to slow. That's what it means. It's slow. So
mm.
sometimes words can also affect clarity in my mind. That's the way I think of that. Because if we do this in the way that I would think, we want to have that clarity, but we also want to make sure, like you say, the elevator pitch is narrow, and also we're not over explaining. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about what they do, they kind of over explain it, particularly using words that are so large that it's like you have to go to a dictionary to find out what they're talking about. That's what really drives me insane when these conversations come up. And I bet it does you.
Well, let me give you a simple thing of what I do. So I've got two different audiences. One is fast growing company CEOs. And so I'm not going to talk about that one. What I want to talk about are business leaders, right? So I have a six-word, what I call a CPOP, and CPOP stands for customer point of possibilities. So if you can articulate your CPOP in less than 10 words, what ultimately happens is the person on the other side is going to hear it and either, by the way, here's the cool part, Cliff. If you are to me one of three people, well, in this case, you are spreading my cred dust because you're sharing my thoughts. So thank you. Um,
Welcome.
if we're having a candid conversation, we'll say a phone call or a Zoom call, you are one of three people. You're either a potential referral partner,
Mhm.
you're either a prospect, or you someone who you may care about me, but you don't give a shit about what I do as a business. And I'm not saying that in any negative way. What happens is if you could say something in less than 10 words and you can then figure out that the person on the other side is either a referral partner or a prospect, that's gold, right? So I'm going to say in 6 words, I'm going to give a hook. The hook will be something to the extent of there's an audience that I add a lot of value to, or there's an audience that really loves working with me. And then I'm going to share my 6 words. Now, the magic is when you hear those 6 words, if you're a referral partner or a prospect, the next thing you have to say is, tell me more. And so let me try it. So, Cliff, there's an audience I love serving.
Mhm.
Pause. Business leaders pursuing abundance with LinkedIn.
Okay, so can you explain that? Can you tell me a little bit more?
Absolutely. Thank you, by the way. Now, if the people on the other side, or if you're in front of a group of people, you could say, you could actually then wait a moment and then say, let me tell you more. But typically, what people are really asking about, what do you mean abundance with LinkedIn? Let me say something, and I'll be less than a minute, right? And by the way, the elevator pitch, the reason I encourage people to throw it out is the elevator pitch comes from the head. When you speak and you come from your heart, you have a better chance of people getting to know and like you. If you speak from your head, there's nothing to grab onto. So regarding that CPOP, what I would normally say, and this is business leaders pursuing abundance with LinkedIn. Here's what I'm going to say. Um, I've been on LinkedIn since before LinkedIn was making money. I was actually commissioned by two of the founders to write and publish LinkedIn's first book. And so what I'm going to do is I work with people who are interested in having LinkedIn. That's where their customers are. And I'm going to show them and work with them to pursue the 20% of functionality that delivers 80% of the value. And it is a way in which they could be living within and executing on their purpose.
Man, I bet you it's like I work in the call center world. So that CPOP that you're talking about definitely would come into the mix of the conversation because we literally have seconds before people decide whether they're going to engage or disengage with us. And our voice and our tone and everything like that really comes into play. And of course, the credibility factor and uh, you know the discernment, all that's going to be in there because if they hear that you're unsure, you're done. You're like, forget it. They're not going to buy into you and they're not going to listen to you. And particularly with troubleshooting, they're just going to try their own thing while you're on the phone with them and basically you've lost control of the call. So that's a kind of a customer service perspective of it. But so I have to make sure that even though I'm representing my client and they still have credibility, by the way, they're big, they have a lot of credibility in the market. If I don't have credibility, if I don't have the juice, as it were, then they're not going to want to engage with me. They're going to say, never mind, I'll call back. And basically, you've created another interaction and lost that, and the value decreases, in my mind. Would that be a correct assessment in ensuring that you are tabling and creating that the value for the people with
Oh,
regard to credibility?
absolutely perfect. Yes. Great example. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, so it's all that, and of course more. So, um, how do you get in front of people and share these thoughts with them? What's the first step for you to basically start to engage and talk about credibility with people?
It's really funny. Um, After doing the research, so spent a year in the research, I then created a business and was working on selling credibility for 3.5 years. And then I realized, what's more important than credibility, or at least what starts with what opens the door and gets people excited is clarity. So basically, clarity opens the door, credibility keeps it open.
Mhm.
And so I spent a year focused on clarity. And what I had a really big brainstorm. Actually, one of my friends, a guy by the name of Ken Cook, helped me have a huge brainstorm. And this is just 4 to 6 months ago. And what he helped me understand is that this expression, by the way, is one of those that I've known forever, but I've only started deploying 4 to 6 months ago.
Mhm.
Sell them what they want, deliver what they need. So Cliff, to me, they really do need clarity and credibility. But what they want at the CEO, fast-growing CEO level, they want executive abundance. So in my CPOP, I incorporate executive abundance. For
Mhm.
business leaders, whether you're inside of organizations or independently running companies, what
Mhm.
do they really want? They've got to use this tool, LinkedIn, effectively. So I'm talking about pursuing abundance with LinkedIn. And so I'm selling people what they want. Now, when I deliver either executive coaching or the LinkedIn framework, I'm actually delivering clarity, credibility. I'm delivering what they need.
I see. So that they can get that abundance. What is the abundance that you want to give them or try to get them to get, well, along with the clarity, of course, to make sure their message is clear and their credibility follows that. What is
Uh,
the what is the abundance that you find that they're most looking for?
do you want me to give you the answers for both audiences or just the business leader audience?
Whichever one you think is the most critical at this time, because I'm sure they're both audiences are equally important. But where do you see, particularly with your line of work, where do you see most of your traction as far as the business goes?
Oh, it goes both. You asked the question they didn't answer, so let me answer both. Um, the way I reach executives is through LinkedIn and through speaking. The way I reach business leaders is primarily through LinkedIn. So I'm a client of my own of the own service. And what is abundance? Well, a lot of people, what I mentioned before, it's using the 20% of functionality that gives you 80% of value.
Mhm.
So in today's world, many people say, "Hey, we're going to create posts or videos and they're going to go, are you ready? Viral."
Yeah.
And I know people who have 2 million plus followers on LinkedIn, and what they will tell you, even if their post goes viral, is they've never picked a client up from it, right? So that is not writing content is not necessarily the 20% of functionality that's important. Now, I do recommend that people write at least one post a week just to show you're current. But the real value in LinkedIn is LinkedIn Messenger. The real value is using LinkedIn Messenger to encourage incremental conversations. And so the most important thing that anyone can do is to get more and more people that are interested in having conversations with them. And you bring the conversations typically off to Zoom or some other video channel. And that to me is abundance, is having enough conversations with your audience so that I'll give you an example. You have enough conversations with the audience that you know you're doing the right thing and it's working. So Cliff, I'll give you an example. One of my clients, 70 years old, he's a former CFO and still doing CFO work today. And he came in and said, and about 3, 4 months ago, we created a CPOP for him. Now, it was probably the best CPOP he can create at the time because, many of us have marketing cookie cutter stuff that gets in the way.
Right. Yeah.
And last week he came to me and said, "Hey, Mitchell, can I change my CPOP?" Now, by the way, it's his, not mine. So
Right.
the answer is, of course. And he doesn't need permission. And he goes, "Well, I changed it." And I go, "Well, tell me what it is." Now, the CPOP's a formula, and he followed the formula. And he shared the CPOP, and then he looked at me. He goes, "How come you're not excited?" And the thing is, they were just words until I asked the next question. Next question I asked him is, "Well, why did you come up with this CPOP? Why is this important to you?" And what he said was, "Well, over the last couple of months, I've been meeting with people. And as I've been meeting with people, I've been reminded of the things that CFOs do that I don't like and the things that CFOs do that I do like. And so I crafted the CPOP around the things I do like." And
Yeah.
then I looked at him and said, "I love this new CPOP." Right. So abundance is for him at the stage he was at was getting enough research done, enough people to talk to, so he could zoom in and get more focused on what's important to him. And now, I'm hoping to see what happens, or looking forward to seeing what happens, 2, 3 months from now, after he's now focused on this audience. Does he narrow in more, or is this the right one for him? And so abundance is having the opportunity to focus on the right things so you're getting the results that you really want.
And you want the abundance of those. You want as much as you can get. And you were saying that this has to come from the heart. Um,
Yeah. Well, that's why I let me cut you off for a second. Abundance, one of the implications of abundance is not that you get as much as you can get. So I don't want to actually I technically am correcting that. Abundance is that you have enough, right?
uh,
And there's a difference between I want everything as much as I can get versus, hey, I want to get to the point where I have enough. One of
mm,
my clients only wants 3 meetings a week. So we had to go into Calendly and structure it so that because when we first started, she ended up getting more meetings and she's 73 and she wasn't excited about, more meetings. Um, and so we put in the Calendly a limitation for her, having 3 a week is enough.
yeah,
Right? And so that's probably the thing I'd say that abundance to in my and I'm getting a PhD, so I will do more research on this word. But based on my understanding at the moment, having an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset, the abundance mindset is that you reach the point where you have enough. A scarcity is I need to get as much as I can forever, because if I don't get it, somebody else will. It makes the relationships a whole lot different.
it sure does. Yeah. And you point to something that's really that's sort of now happening with myself with regard to the podcast. Now I'm getting enough that I can do interviews just about every week. In fact, I'm now into almost, mid May and starting into June. So that's what happened when I started using the matchmaker platform because it's like, oh, now people are starting to connect and want to be a guest. So it's like, so I understand what you're talking about. It makes sense. And I take it with the LinkedIn, you're using that as the launch pad to go into other things, other platforms, like you say, into like this one, Zoomed, and then moving into the things that you want to do with that person. So, so that is really incredibly good to start from. I didn't, I have to admit, I have a LinkedIn account. I really haven't looked into that and how to
Mhm.
use it, as a tool to do this kind of work. Because it's like, okay, how do you do that? And and how do you do that, like you say, with credibility and clarity, um, and of course authenticity too, to go forward with that. This is really fascinating. It really does get quite deep, doesn't it? Or do you find it or does it basically matter, or not so much matter, or does it depend on the person? Do a lot of people go really in depth with this, or no? Like, what do you find the level of engagement with regard to this kind of question?
Would you mind asking the question again? Um, because I was thinking you were going in one direction and then you went in another, and I'm not sure if I truly understand the nature of the question. Would you mind trying it again?
Yeah, sure. So
Thanks.
with regard to engagement and getting people to talk about creativity, clarity, and of course, probably authenticity, do you find people go really in depth with it, or do you find people, in other words, what's the level of engagement you find? Is it really in-depth conversations, or is it more like you get them to start to ask themselves these kinds of questions?
Ah,
Yeah, that kind of thing. Like, how do
thank you.
you,
I'm tracking.
yeah, basically,
Humans are interesting. I have, by the way, I'll pull this up on the side while I'm answering this question. I have 10 values of credibility. And so I'm not looking at the camera for a second, just so I could focus on sharing those. And you'll see that authenticity is part of that. So for those who are for those who are watching the video, if this isn't a podcast, you won't see this, but if you're watching the video, there are 10 values of credibility. And credibility is the quality in which you're trusted, known, and liked. And part of being trusted, to me, of the four elements there, coachability is one of the most important, but there's also authenticity, vulnerability, integrity. What I'll say is when I first started podcasting, what I was taught was, well, never ask the host to clarify information. You're supposed to be an expert. You should answer all the questions. So you asked me a question I wasn't sure, right? So I said, well, tell me more, right? That to me is a candid conversation. And the when I'm talking with clients, we'll start with, well, either clients or prospects. I really need to know who they are. And for me to know who somebody is, I need to know they're a C-pop. And I need to know that they feel that their customer point of possibilities, who they serve and how they serve them, that they feel that, and that's really them versus some marketing cookie cutter approach of them. And once we once we do that, and so for some people, um, it's easy. There are people who just live out loud, and I can help them articulate their CPOP in minutes. Sometimes with the really out loud people, they'll say it in my first question. For some people, it might take, if it's going to take 10-ish minutes, that's almost I did a CPOP exercise with a host, and we were, oh no, I remember this. This was yesterday. It was one of my friends, and it took him really high in an organization, but still full of marketing cookie cutter stuff. It took us 10 minutes, and we only had 11, right?
Right.
And and we were just at the borderline of me going, hey, let's get another time to do it. And then all of a sudden, he said the magic words, right? And at the end of the day, if you go back to the story I told you, here's a guy who, retirement age at 70, but wants to continue working and wants to help people with an area he has expertise that he loves working in, right? And so that's part of what I'm listening for when I'm talking with people. So if they live out loud, it doesn't go deep because it's a candid conversation they normally have. If they don't live out loud, then I got to pull some stuff out of them.
That's when it gets deep. So one of as we get near to the end of this really excellent interview, I'm really enjoying learning about this as well.
Well, thank
What
you.
makes a LinkedIn profile credible in your mind?
So when I look at a LinkedIn profile, I I look at it from the perspective of, and let me put this here. I look at it from the perspective of trust, know, and like. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the first thing I see. And if you look at the top of a LinkedIn profile, first thing you see is you see the person's picture, you see their background, and you see the header. Now, if they're using the generic background for LinkedIn, that's already a negative. If they have a picture that's of their dog or cat, that's absolutely, or no picture at all, that's absolutely a negative. What I'm looking for is I'm actually looking for their CPOM in their headline and also in the background behind them, right? So what you want is in the first 3 to 5 seconds to be able to garner enough trust that the person wants to learn more. So let's say the profile is good enough. I'm just going to say above 50%. 50% of the profiles is so bad it's not even worth looking at. So let's say it's above the 50%. And then I'm going to scroll to the bottom of LinkedIn. What I'm going to look at are two things. I'm going to look at the endorsements they received. And what I'm really looking for is LinkedIn lists two these days. I want to ensure that the skills that they're being endorsed for are in alignment with what they say they're doing at the top. There's probably 90% of the time it's not. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if I really wanted to get to know them, I'm going to see how many recommendations they've received and how many they've written. And if I want to get to know who they are and how they speak, I'm going to read two or three of the recommendations they've given other people because that's their love language. So that's the second thing I do as I get to know them. And if I do read the recommendations, I'm getting to see if I like them. And then I'll scroll back to the about section and see how they show up. And I'm really looking for an about section, or I'm looking for some of the job things. I'm looking for videos with customer testimonials. I'm looking for something that is more than a resume. And so that's to me the know, like, and trust that I garner out of a LinkedIn profile has to do with looking at the first the top, the bottom, and then the middle of the LinkedIn profile.
Okay, there you go. That's really a fundamental point in anything like this to establish that credibility. I guess you want to basically find those, and of course, uh, if somebody engages you that doesn't have that kind of credibility, do you help them basically realign in LinkedIn to get better at that?
So if you remember on the circle that's associated with being trustworthy,
Right.
there's an on-off switch. And the on-off switch is the value of credibility called coachability. So if they're coachable, yeah. If they're not coachable, it doesn't matter how much money they have. It's not going to be fun. It's not worth working with them.
Absolutely. So, speaking of, because obviously you want to work with people and help them get all of that together. How do people reach out to you and basically begin the journey?
Clearly, you can go to LinkedIn. However, what I would prefer you do is go to my website. So it's mitchelllevy.com. mitchellevy.com, three L's in there. And from there, you could see the programs I'm running, what I'm doing. Obviously, you could connect to LinkedIn or other things. Or if this is something that you find useful, but you have questions, click on the contact us and book time on directly on my calendar. So mitchellevy.com.
There you go. That's an excellent endpoint here. So, Mitchell, I really do appreciate this. This has been a really nice interview to do and to talk about this because we need this in our society. We need credible people in every line of business and every kind of thing that we see out there being done, whether we're talking with a doctor or whether we're talking with somebody who sells us a car or, somebody who's going to sell us an internet program or whatnot. Credibility is so important. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to jump in here and talk about this.
Oh, Cliff, thanks for having me, and I enjoyed it, and I appreciate your line of questioning and your learning as we're moving along. So, thanks for having me, and I truly did, and this will be the third time I do it. Truly did have a good, candid conversation.
What Mitchell is talking about here really is incredibly important. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time to jump in here, walk the journey with us today, listen and learn. And please subscribe, share the videos. I really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning into Zoomed In on Candid Conversation Zoomed In a Comments video channel. My name is Cliff. We will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.